And now it's Deborah Kobylt Live and Little Italy Podcast.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on our podcast. And please welcome Marianna Gatto. She is the executive director and co-founder of the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles. I'm thrilled to have you joining us today. Thanks for joining us, Marianna.
Deborah, thank you for having me.
Very exciting. And I recently paid a visit again to the museum, and we couldn't leave. We closed it down, right? It was a fascinating look into the journey of Italian Americans coming not just into Los Angeles, but into the country. So there's a lot to go over about this museum. First of all, tell me, what is the mission of the museum and why did you undertake this? It's a big one.
Well, so the mission of the Italian American Museum of Los Angeles is to showcase and preserve the history of Italians and Italian Americans in Southern California and the nation. Many people aren't aware that Los Angeles is home to the nation's fifth largest Italian American population, and that our history here is actually quite long. It spans nearly 200 years to 1827. Italians and Italian Americans have contributed to every aspect of the city's development, and really its character. They've been integral in shaping its character, and that's what the museum explores. The reason I got involved to kind of address your second question is growing up in Los Angeles, there wasn't much of a mirror for Italian Americans. I often wondered, well, what is my family doing here? Don't, all Italians come from New York. How is it that, where do I belong in the Los Angeles mosaic? And when I was in college, an undergrad, I learned about a building on the edge of downtown called the Italian Hall that had been constructed in 1908 and served as a community gathering place. At that time, there was an effort being made to restore the building, which had really languished after years of not really being cared for. And I walked into the building and it just kind of spoke to me. I said, this needs to be a museum and I want to be the director.
Wow.
So it's kind of one of those my lips to God's ears moments. And I'm obviously, this is a very abbreviated explanation. It took, quite a bit of work and many years after that, but here we are.
Yeah. You know what I found fascinating, people who haven't been there yet, there's a little speakeasy door, right? So you really get a feeling for what was going on in that building from 1908 on. Tell us about that little door that's still there.
Okay, so the Italian Hall is built at the turn of the century. At that time, that part of downtown Los Angeles was really the heart of LA's Little Italy, or one of its Italian neighborhoods, I should say. And on the ground floor, when the building opened, there was a very elegant saloon owned by Italian immigrants. And of course, when prohibition became the law of the land, the saloon was forced to close. And it seems, the documentation isn't great, but it seems that shortly thereafter, another saloon moved upstairs, an illicit bar, speakeasy. And when we were doing the restoration work on the building, we uncovered the original door, the little slide, the little panel where people would knock, and we probably had the special knock in order to get in and enjoy an adult beverage.
Yeah, I just really felt like I was stepping back into that period of time, which was very exciting. Also, it's right there next to Olivera Street. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about the history of Italians and the Mexican people. I'll bet you it's something that a lot of people don't know.
So one of the, as I mentioned, the first Little Italies, or the earliest Little Italies in Los Angeles, was located at the plaza where Olvera Street is today. And that is one of the oldest parts of the city. Interestingly enough, that's kind of where LA began, if you will, as a colony of Spain and then ruled by Mexico. But one of the things that drew people to Los Angeles, including Italian immigrants, was the agricultural industry and the wine industry. So way back in the early days, Olvera Street was actually called Wine Street. And there were numerous Italian-owned wineries on Olvera Street. There's actually an Italian restaurant on Olvera Street at one time. Now we think of it as mostly, relating to the city's Mexican history, Mexican culture. But it was kind of like this cross section where all of LA came together, the Chinese American community, Italian American, French, Mexican, of course, even the African American community, all kind of, lived and did business around each other in this part of downtown. And I think what you were getting at was in early Los Angeles, before Italian women started to arrive in significant numbers, a lot of Italian men intermarried with the Mexican community.
Yeah. And that was just something that I think people didn't realize. They had a lot in common, right? Their religion, they were Catholic, family, food. There is a lot more in common than we think about, actually, right?
Yeah, kind of like a common Latin culture. Italians faced prejudice in different parts of the country because they were Catholic, because they were considered so different than the Anglo-Saxon power base. But in early Los Angeles, many, the Italians were kind of welcomed by the Spanish, California Mexican-American community.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about some of the permanent exhibits that you have there. So much I didn't know. I grew up an Italian American, predominantly in New Jersey. And no, it's not like the Jersey Shore people, please. It's really not, that show, it's like, why did that give us a bad name? It's like, oh, you're from Jersey? It's like, well, yeah, but, right. But let's talk a little bit about some of the permanent exhibits. One I found interesting was Italians in Hollywood, especially back in the day, right? We were often in the background. And by that, I mean, we were the grips and the people that were handling the equipment. And often Italians were more the clown, right? Could you tell us a little bit about that, how we were portrayed in Hollywood back then?
Yeah, so, in the really, really early days of Hollywood, we're talking, kind of the silent era, a lot of Hollywood films kind of reflected this idea of who are these Italians invading our shores? And they're bringing, all these kind of horrible things to America, crime and what have you. So really from the earliest days of Hollywood, Italians were portrayed in a negative light. And then as you moved into, the 1920s and 30s, you saw the kind of the birth of the gangster film. Many of us think of The Godfather as being the first mob film, but which I think, describing this such really doesn't do it justice. It is one of my favorite films, just for the record. It's a beautiful piece.
Oh, me too.
But really from the earliest days of Hollywood, there was this idea that Italians were others and they didn't really belong in America. And so you saw that kind of reflected in those films. And still today, overwhelmingly, unfortunately, Italians are still portrayed as kind of criminals and not very well educated. And, in this day and age where we're talking about representation, I personally feel, the way in which we are represented really needs to be examined a bit deeper.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've interviewed some Italians, one who was responsible for the Tomcat, right? That the plane, and others who have worked with JPL to launch some of the rockets into space and in Mars. I mean, good heavens, we've come a long way. And which is why I actually enjoy interviewing Italians from all walks of life, right? The famous ones, those that people don't know about, those in science and math and history, which is why your museum is so exciting, because you really do go through so much of that, particularly those permanent exhibits, which are so well documented. Let's talk also about very often what the Italian Americans had to go through in terms of prejudice. Some of what was there in the exhibits, again, I didn't know about, including lynchings, didn't realize what we had to go through. Could you tell our audience about some of that?
Sure. So, in a very short period of time, from the late 1800s to the early 1920s, some 4 million Italians arrived on American shores. And the primary reason that they were, they came to America and why they were recruited to come here was to be the cheap labor for this nation that at the time our economy was booming and we needed people to work in the mines and the mills and in the sweatshops and in the fields. And Italians really provided that source of labor. So while we needed these immigrants, the reception to Italians was not always positive. In some cases, there was, really horrific racism and prejudice, discrimination. One of the places that you saw this a lot was in the American South. A lot of Sicilians began settling in New Orleans in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and because in part of their darker skin, and they weren't really aware of America's kind of racial hierarchy. They were sometimes described as like an in-between race. They weren't white, and some people thought that they leaned more towards being colored. And there were actually some famous cases where, Italians were, forced to attend segregated schools, or they could not prove conclusively that they were white. And in some places they were just despised because they were Italian. And one very famous lynching that took place in New Orleans in the 1890s involved 11 Italians who were accused of murdering a police captain, and they were acquitted. But an angry mob that included, thousands of residents, some of the most respected residents of the city of New Orleans, lynched these 11 men.
Oh, that's just absolutely horrific. When I saw that, I was a little stunned. I understand from a very small perspective, because growing up in New Jersey, I often was the subject of prejudice for being Italian. And I would think, what are they talking about? I mean, I know that it was, common for my mom and dad's day, but gosh, I didn't realize that in my day it was still happening, right? Absolutely. And they would say, well, your skin is dark. And I'm thinking, geez, it's amazing to me that this was still going on in the 70s and 80s and not really long ago, right? But look how far we've come.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit more about one of your favorite exhibits, because what amazed me, Marianna, is this is pretty much your brainchild. You have a phenomenal staff that supports you, but this comes out of here, out of Marianna. And I'd like to know, well, it does. I'd like to know what really speaks to you as you're putting together these exhibits. How do you do it? How does it unfold?
Well, first, I have to say that I've had some, amazing teachers and partners in, creating the museum, our exhibitions, everywhere from our board to the city of Los Angeles, who owns the building. And many of, the scholars who, all of this is not, necessarily my original research, but, a tremendous amount of information has come from folks who have, like myself, spent years, decades, many times preserving, documenting this. But my favorite, I'm sorry, the question was my favorite exhibition? Is that what
Well, sadly, I rolled like 4 questions into one, so sorry about that. But I started with, what is one of your favorites? What are one of your favorites exhibits down there?
Well, I certainly love, the exhibition on anti-Italianism that you mentioned, because I think it's such a great teaching tool. I think more than ever, Andy Warhol talked about, 15 minutes of fame. Now, I think with the social media, TikTok, it's like 15 seconds. Information, it comes and goes so quickly. And to kind of provide a little bit more background, to encourage people to kind of reflect as to who we are as a nation, as to some of the strife that many groups have experienced. It gives us, I think, a better idea of who we are as a country, and maybe a little bit more empathy at times too for others. So I would say, like, that's one of my favorites, because I love watching how people react to it. I love seeing how diverse people walk in and say, gosh, like, I didn't know that, or that was kind of similar to what my family experienced. And it creates, I think, a sense of common ground, which is needed in these times more than ever.
Isn't it? Well, what I like about the way you set this up, first of all, it's about 5,000 square feet. It's rather dramatic in size, right? You have various rooms, but the main room, it's lovely how you set up. There's little cushions. There we go. We have a great shot of that. Thank you, Tony, my engineer. And you can sit there and really take in the information. It's very exciting. I mean, you have, and modern, I will say, housed within this beautiful building from 1908, as I said. And you have some of the information there on like on glass, right? And it could you tell us a little bit about it? You probably do a way better job than I am explaining how we look at it.
So, our permanent exhibition is kind of designed to attract both like the more casual visitor and the more interested visitor alike. Only 15% of our visitors, of our audiences in person, are of Italian extraction. So we really designed this museum in order to kind of be relevant to everyone. We want everyone to take, it's not an Italian Pride Museum or Italian American Pride Museum.
No.
We want everyone to kind of take away information and understanding about not only Southern California's history, which really isn't, I think, showcased as much as it could be, considering how much Southern California produces for the world, but also, the history of our nation. And so we present information in a way where, again, our visitors are from 9 years old to 90 years old. And we want everyone to kind of connect with the content. So there's the large glass panels that you saw, and they provide just a very brief overview of the permanent exhibition. And then attached to each case that contains kind of artifacts illustrating each permanent exhibition, there is a tablet where you can explore the permanent exhibition in greater detail. And one way that I think that we're kind of unique, or maybe a little bit ahead of the curve, is we partnered with Getty, the Getty Cultural Institute. So our entire permanent exhibition is also accessible online. And we have people all over the world, visiting our website and interacting with the content. We felt that, when we reopened in 2016, we didn't want the museum's geography or the walls to prevent people from accessing this information. And so that's, I think, one of the ways in which we're a little different from many museums.
Yeah, excellent. Talk to me a little bit about the app. You now have an app, right? Could you tell us about that?
Yeah. So during the pandemic, we had a lot of online content before COVID, but so we were able to kind of transition to virtual programming easier. But we introduced an app that allows people to kind of experience the permanent exhibition on a deeper level, either at home or when they visit the museum. And it's narrated by some noteworthy personalities: Joe Mantegna, Francesca Fanti, Lina Prima, and many others, Michael Giacchino, Academy Award winning composer, who helped take you, on a journey through the permanent exhibition, narrate some information about the artifacts on display, and give the museum a little bit more of a personal touch.
Yeah. You also have events going on there. When I was there, in fact, you were having an event. You have events, you have school groups. Thank goodness school groups can come back now. Tell us a little bit about that for people who want to maybe host an event there as well.
Yes. So in addition to our permanent exhibition, we also present 2 temporary exhibitions each year. And our current one, which will be closing in a couple weeks, is called Woven Lives, exploring women's needlework from the Italian diaspora. And it basically tells, it may sound a little odd, but it really explores women's experiences told through needlework, things like crochet and lace making, and these experiences of women that were often, kind of hidden, that were never told. And so that exhibition has been extremely popular. It's going to be traveling to the East Coast next. This is, all of these exhibitions we create in-house from scratch. We conceive them, write them, we curate them. So we're really proud when our children, so to speak, kind of like continue on into the outside world. With this exhibition, we've done just a slew of programming, from lace making workshops to crocheting lectures. So when you were there, we were doing one of those workshops. And again, what's interesting, I think, or what's noteworthy about these events is they enable us to bring in new people each time. So we're in Los Angeles. It's a city of very diverse interests. One of our past exhibitions looked at Italians in animation. Our upcoming exhibition that opens in November looks at Pinocchio. And we can talk about that more in a minute, but we do just a variety of programs to really attract, people who may not be totally enticed by Italian history, but they're interested in crocheting, or they're interested in making their own magazine, or they're interested in learning about the experience of Italian Jews during the Holocaust. So we also do a lot of very fun events, who doesn't like Italian food and wine? One of our largest events each year is Taste of Italy. We didn't have it this year. We didn't have it this year or last, or in 2020, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. This year, when we were, setting out to plan it way earlier in the year, we just discovered that the restaurants hadn't recovered yet, but we'll be back in force next year. And that event draws about 2,500 people. We have some of the best restaurants in the region. We pour 100 Italian wines. There's live entertainment. It's just a lot of fun. Again, we're always, I mentioned what our mission is, but really what at the heart of it is also to create community and get people off their phones, out of their homes, and interacting with each other.
Yeah, no, it is a lot of fun, and you're learning at the same time, which is what I always like. That always attracts me. But back to that, I think it's called Woven Lives, right? The exhibit that is about to go to New York. That is definitely for everyone, because my husband loved it too, and I can't exactly say that he's made a career being a seamstress, because it's not about that. It's really about the lives of women. Contribution, which I found very, very interesting. Could you tell us a little bit about women and our role in our history throughout Los Angeles as Italian Americans and integrating with society? What did we do? All that.
Yes. So, Italian American women, even in the histories of our community, are often overlooked or forgotten. Sometimes they're in their husband's shadows. But really, from the early days of when the Italian community began settling here, women were an integral part. Even if they were a little bit obscured, they helped establish and operate some of the businesses that were really the heart and soul of the community. One organization comes to mind, the Italian Women's Club, which was founded in 1922 and is now celebrating its 100th anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah. So in fact, I'm going to send you a membership to it, because we want to keep this club going for another 100 years. These were some of the best educated, most active women in the community, who did everything from, fundraise for victims of natural disasters, to purchasing books for local libraries, supporting families in need. It's a charitable organization that has contributed so much to the local community. So there's so many ways that Italian American women have been an integral part of our city and continue to be. And I think that's one of the reasons why we need an organization specifically for us.
Now let's talk a little bit about the upcoming Pinocchio exhibition. I'm very excited for that. Who doesn't love Pinocchio? We've all grown up with him. Little kids love him now too. I think it's going to be a giant hit, especially because I believe Disney is coming out with a movie. Not that you planned it that way either, but gosh, what great planning, right?
Yes.
And you certainly didn't intend for that. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect.
Yes. So just a little background, this exhibition was supposed to open in June of 2020, but obviously the universe had other plans.
Yeah.
So we pushed it. We pushed it to this year, to November. And Pinocchio, many of you are most familiar with, Disney's interpretation of the work, but it was actually written by an Italian author, Carlo Collodi, in 1883. And what's fascinating to us about Pinocchio is it has been translated into nearly 300 languages, more than any other book besides the Bible. And so we asked, well, why? Why? That's kind of like the essence of the exhibition is, what's responsible for Pinocchio's enduring fame? Why do people love him all around the world? Why do we continue to reinvent him in endless ways? You know, if you take out your smartphone, there's the Pinocchio, you know, the lying face emoji. You know, there's so many cultural, you know, when you are trying to indicate that somebody's telling a lie, you know, there's an emoji for that, and it's a long nose. And so we kind of explore that question in detail. As part of this exhibition, we're going to be exhibiting one of the few remaining first edition copies of Pinocchio that exist in the world. It's an extremely there will be vintage toys. There will be, of course, things from the Disney film, Academy Award nominated costumes from a recent adaptation of Pinocchio that was released in Italy last year. So on the surface, it looks like an exhibition purely for children and families, but it's something that everybody will enjoy. We really encourage folks to come visit. It opens to the public November 5th.
I'm so excited about this, I have to tell you, because he was always one of my favorites. My kids loved him. We still have little Pinocchios all over the house that they decided to stave. It's just wonderful. Now, let me ask you this. Italians throughout Los Angeles, how many hundreds of thousands are there of us?
So I believe, you know, my figures are a little bit dated, but I think in LA proper, there's about a little over 300,000. And then in LA County, I think it's over 600,000. But again, I'm a little rusty. Sometimes I say like I'm a historian, not an encyclopedia, and sometimes I forget my figures, but we're somewhere around there.
Yeah, and we've sort of collected all over, haven't we? We're in the South Bay. We're in, I believe is it San Gabriel? I mean, where did many Italian groups end up collecting throughout LA?
So originally there were 5 Italian enclaves in Los Angeles: the Plaza, where the museum is, Lincoln Heights, the North Broadway district, which is now Chinatown, the East Side, which is now largely known as the Arts District, and San Pedro. And so when they started to move out of these neighborhoods, really like in many of them anyway, in like the 1920s and 1940s, and they went on to places like Alhambra in the San Gabriel Valley, Covina, Glendale, Eagle Rock, they continued to kind of move on to greener pastures. Many people say, well, you know, why didn't they stay in Little Italy? Because sometimes Little Italies are meant to be, you know, temporary. They're where an immigrant group, or in this case, Italians, obviously settled, where they could be around people who spoke their same languages. But most people, what do they aspire to? The white picket fence, the nicer home, the more space, a better neighborhood. But so now you see Italians still clustered into places like Santa Monica, San Pedro, parts of the San Gabriel Valley, Glendale. We're everywhere.
We are everywhere. And I love that as a museum, you sort of collect us all together. I try and do the same thing with our show, because we're stronger if we stick together, right? And we tell each other stories, which is what I think is wonderful that you do. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot a little here, and I'll actually go first. Okay. What is something about the Italian culture, the Italian history and heritage that surprised you? I'll give you an example. When I read that It's a Wonderful Life was actually conceived by an Italian. I did not know this until I went to your museum. Can you tell us a little bit more about that story and about other stories that people will go, oh, I had no idea?
Yeah, so of course, It's a Wonderful Life, which is, I think, in like the top 10, most iconic American films of all time. And I want to say like that was the, AFI, or I think that was the entity that named it such, was of course the work of Frank Capra. And Frank Capra came here as a child. He was immigrated from Sicily, and he actually settled in Lincoln Heights, right next to the museum. He sold newspapers as a boy on the corner across from the museum. And, he created so many amazing films, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, you name it. And the character of Jimmy Stewart's character in It's a Wonderful Life was in part modeled after A.P. Giannini, who was, the founder of the Bank of Italy, which is now the Bank of America. A lot of people don't realize that. The Bank of Italy was the first bank for the common person, not just for Italians, but, they established branches for women right after women got the right to vote, branches that were operated by and for women. Giannini hired tellers and associates that spoke Chinese, Spanish, Greek, you name it, to really bring in these different communities that were they were working towards the American dream and were ignored by other banks. So that's a whole nother story. But so Frank Capra, what an amazing figure. Gosh, there's so many incredible stories within the museum.
The telephone.
The telephone, yeah. Meucci, so, 16 years before Bell, Alexander Graham Bell, Meucci was demonstrating this invention, but he was incredibly poor. He wasn't able to renew his patent. And he died in obscurity. Recently, I want to say about 15 years ago, Congress acknowledged him as the true inventor of the telephone, or having played, the integral role that he did. And, just calling attention to some of these stories that were, are destined to become forgotten if we don't, as a passion of mine. But there's so many over the years, from collecting oral histories to doing research. There's been so many stories that really just kind of like hit you in your heart. And you say, gosh, I want to tell that story. I want to help preserve it, if only in a small way.
Yeah, and of course the radio, the Marconi. There's a lot of big names behind some of our, who's that?
Jacuzzi. Yeah.
Okay, I didn't even think about that one. Okay, that's a good one.
Sorry,
Tell me more about.
Well, in a nutshell, like there's the story of the jacuzzi. I'm going to do this really fast, but these were a family of brothers who came here around World War I. Their last name was Jacuzzi, which would have been pronounced Jacuzzi in Italian. And they invented many things, including, agricultural pumps and an early airplane, enclosed cabin airplane. Some of their inventions are in the Smithsonian, the jacuzzi propeller, or the toothpick propeller, I think it's called. But one of their sons was born with a debilitating disease, and that was what inspired what we now, it's become a brand no more like Xerox or Kleenex. It's like, oh, let's go soak in the jacuzzi, right? But so it was invented as a way to help his son, have these therapeutic baths at home. It started as an ordinary pump that could be put into a bathtub. And from there, they developed these enclosed units that, again, talk about like icons of style, of inventions, of entrepreneurship in America. But yeah, we could
Gosh, yeah, we could go on all day about that, but that's the type of thing that you'll see at your museum. And also if you go on your website, right, and you go to little drop down boxes, there's so much information there. I know that you've got a lot there also for schools and school kids, right? You've got questions and the kids can answer them. Could you briefly tell us about that, those programs for kids?
Yeah, so prior to the pandemic, we had about 300,000 kids. Well, I shouldn't say kids. Wow. We had about 300,000 students from kindergarten to college age visit annually. And so of course we do a lot of programming for students, but we also offer resources for teachers. I'm a former educator myself, and I guess I'm still an educator, right? But I'm not in the classroom.
Oh yeah.
We publish each year California content standards-based curricula that teachers can download for free from our website and use as a teaching tool in their classroom. Everything from teaching, dance and culture to teaching U.S. history, local history.
You mentioned a little bit about yourself growing up as an Italian person here in Los Angeles. What was life like in your home? Was it the traditional Italian home where there was lots of food and all this? And I know I was always curious about my upbringing. Everyone seemed so colorful, right? I'm convinced that's why I became a journalist, because I would look at everyone and think, what's your story? So I'm curious, what motivated you to do this even as a little kid? Did you always have lots of questions? What was it like?
So I was really just a I was a nerd. I grew up in the library. I won the library reading awards in the summer. I had more books than friends, but I always loved history. I was really drawn to history. And I think sometimes our path, our vocation in life is shown to us at an early age. For me, history was what just kind of ignited that spark in me. And really from the time I was probably in like first or second grade, I was reading about immigrants, Ellis Island. And it was just like, I don't know, it kind of put like little goosebumps on me. And I didn't always understand what that meant, but I knew I was fascinated by it. My grandparents, my grandmother died before I was born, but my grandfather died when I was 6. And I remember, my earliest memories are, going with him to places like little Italian delis in Los Feliz where we lived in Hollywood, and seeing people who were of his generation, who were immigrants, and feeling this attachment, and after he passed, more of this sense of longing to be able to return to that. Because by the time I came around, a lot of these, what had been kind of like these strongholds of Italian, neighborhoods were starting to dissolve. There were little reminders of them, but I didn't always understand such things. Like, for instance, my dad would take me to St. Peter's Italian Church in the North Broadway district, now Chinatown. And I remember as a kid wondering, like, well, what's this Italian church doing in Chinatown? And then there's, right around the corner from the church, there's a Columbus pharmacy, and there's a Casa Italiana, and there's a Little Joe's Italian restaurant. And I didn't really understand, that you're talking about being in elementary school. So it wasn't until much later that as I started to study this, it's like, oh, now it makes sense. But to answer your question, my family was traditional in some respects, but not as traditional, I would say, as like some of those who, grew up in like the big Italian families of, back East and even here. I would say like the ways in which we were most traditional was, the Catholic faith was very, a big part of our upbringing. We went to mass every Sunday as a family at 7:30 in the morning. I went to Catholic school, and my dad really communicated to me the importance of knowing who you are, knowing your origins, always respecting them, and having a sense of reverence for what came before you. And I really think that's what shaped me a lot, and why I kind of do what I do and why I was drawn to it in the beginning. And hopefully that wasn't too long of an explanation.
No, you created a picture for me. You created a visual for me, which is what you're very good at, which is why you've got this incredible museum. You're able to put the words right there into a room so that it comes to life for us. I love that. Before I let you go, what do you think are some of the big misconceptions about Italian people?
Oh gosh. Well, I think thanks to, in part to like the media perpetuating these stereotypes that I might add would be completely unacceptable for any other group. Most other ethnic groups have banished these stereotypes, but for some reason they're still deemed okay to do, to aim at Italian Americans. But really, I still get asked the absurd questions about, mob ties and all this, nonsense, which I really, I'm repulsed by. But just to realize how diverse we are as a culture, how diverse the Italian diaspora is. You see that in Los Angeles. You see, the Italian American experience is played out in all different parts of the country, from New York and Chicago to places like Colorado and Louisiana and California, and just how many experiences there are within our heritage, and how many more stories we have yet to tell. And I look forward to helping tell them and helping preserve them.
We look forward to that too. Marianna Gatto, you have just been a delight. Really, honestly, you are just, I mean that. No, we could talk forever, right? It's like, we'll hang up and we'll be talking forever. But I love the research behind this. I'm big on research. And This is a terrific place to visit. Go online if you can't get there right away, but if you can, I believe, what days are you open? Are you open every day?
We're open Tuesday through Sunday from 10 to 3. And then, of course, we've got a huge calendar of upcoming events. You can check out all of what's going on our website, imla.org, or follow us on, Facebook, Instagram. We're everywhere. And then, of course, if you'd like to join, we're a nonprofit. A membership start at $25, and you're helping, preserve, this history and help us, continue our mission.
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing. If anybody goes on any of your pages, you're a terrific cook too. You've managed to continue that tradition as well. That is one that I've broken a little bit. My entire family, terrific in terms of Italian meals, cooking by hand. That's one that sort of passed me by. But you are
come on over. I'll cook for you. Cooks need people to feed, and when I'm cooking for myself, it's like I'm eating crackers and cheese and crackers. But also wanted to mention one last thing, that admission to the museum is free. We welcome your donations, but admission is free. So, bring the whole family. If you're a teacher, bring your school group. We'd love to see you there.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks so much, Marianna Gatto. The Italian American Museum, of Los Angeles, right there on Main Street. Wonderful area. You can walk over to Olivera Street, lots of history, lots of fun, and you can sort of relax as you're going through the museum and take in all the information. I felt like I was actually part of each exhibit as I was watching and reading them. So that was really spectacular. Please visit the museum. Please donate if you'd like. There's a lot more history to come. And don't forget, Woven Lives, I believe, ends this week or next week, and then Pinocchio next month. So, and lots more after that. Thank you so much for joining our Deborah Kobylt Live and Little Italy podcast. I'm your host, Zara Kobylt, and thank you again to Marianna Gatto for joining us today for Italian Heritage Month as well. So you'll find us on all video and audio platforms, whether it's Facebook, YouTube, iHeartRadio, whatever. Just put us in and you'll find us. Anyway, thanks everybody for joining us. Tell your friends. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.